Yeah, so last time we looked at how to create a page or a page component using HTML, and we ended somewhere with something that was complete by HTML, but wasn't looking exactly the way what we are trying to build looked like. So what that was lacking was CSS. All the styles, the cascading style sheets for making the HTML file or code generate exactly what we want to see on the front end. So we need to introduce some styles, styling, or you can call it beautifying the HTML so that it gives us exactly what we want to see. That brings us to the topic of the cascading style sheets that we are going to be looking at. So during this lesson, I'll be introducing CSS, and yes, then after everyone is well conversant with CSS, then we can use it to complete our previous example, and at the end of it, we should make sure that what we have coded is actually exactly the same as what we wanted to build. So maybe to give a little bit about that history, I'm going to share what we wanted to build, and then what we built. So here is what we wanted to build, and let me just share the whole screen so that you can compare what we wanted to build and what we built. Yeah, so on the right is what we want to achieve, and on the left is where we are right now. So what you see on the left is what we built using plain HTML that doesn't have any CSS to style things around, bring in colors, fonts, font colors, put things in the middle, just like you see everything on the right. Yeah. So the CSS that I'm going to be introducing today, for some of you who have done some CSS, you're aware, and for beginners, what we need so that we make our component on the left to achieve what is on the right is CSS, or cascading style sheets for styling the different components. For example, the table, rows, and the list items, and everything. So we need to introduce CSS to be able to achieve what is on the right. Yes, so introduction to CSS. This is our fourth lesson in the dev class, the programming dev class. I gave a brief introduction about CSS, and let's just dive into it. So what is CSS? Those of you who like the full forms of short forms, cascading style sheets is the full form. Yeah. So cascading is like things being on top of others and things like that. It's just English. Then styles are like different forms and things like that. So basically it's just English, just cascading style sheets. CSS is a language that controls the look and feel, in brackets, style of HTML elements. So if you want to change how an HTML element looks like, if you want to change how a web page looks like, if you want to change how a website looks like, yeah, or how it appeals to the viewer, all you need is CSS, yeah. So CSS is also a programming language, and it's mostly used by front-end developers, people they call front-end developers, people who design things that are seen by users. And as we are going to see in the coming slides, how it can be used to achieve the visuals that you want your user to see. Yeah. So CSS, the CSS language can be applied to all HTML tags as long as they are inside the HTML, the main HTML tag. So that we are talking about the body and whatever is inside the body. You can style whichever tag is inside the HTML tag. Okay, so what is the CSS syntax? In the previous lessons, while we were looking at HTML, we looked at the HTML syntax, and this is the CSS syntax. So when you look at this image on your right, yeah, it shows you the CSS rule set consists of selectors and a declaration block. So what is a selector? A selector is the HTML tag or element. When you look on your left here, there is the H1 selector. So the H1 selector selects the H1 tag, the heading. I know most of you remember we have dealt with headings, yeah? So the selector is targeting which element do you want to apply a certain style, yeah? So you need to select it. So there's a selector and then the declaration block. So the declaration block is what has your CSS actually, yeah? So in the declaration block, we have a property and value pair. So a property is like a characteristic of that tag that you're targeting, and then the value is actually the value of that characteristic. Yeah, for example, color. Yeah, if you want to apply a color, so color will be the property, like, or the characteristic, and then blue will be the value. So we are applying the blue color to the H1 tag. Yeah. So when you look at font size, 12 pixels, PX stands for pixels. So the property right now is the font size, like how big do you want that heading to become? And 12 pixels is the value of how big, yeah? Okay, so multiple CSS declarations are separated with semicolons. As you can see, the color blue and font size 12 pixels are two different properties and values, property and value pairs. Yeah, so you separate them with a semicolon, which is this one here, so that the parser or the reader that converts the code into what the user sees is able to tell that these are two different property value pairs. So looking at some of these examples on your left, we have the CSS, yeah? So you write the selector, which is, or the target, what you're targeting, which is the H1 tag, and then you open curly braces, and inside there you write the property, full colon, and then the value, and then you terminate that line with a semicolon. And then you go on the new line, and then you write the next property and then the value. So an example is this HTML. For example, we have an H1 with the words first heading. If we want to style that HTML element with our CSS of H1, so what we do is we apply these styles like this, and then the output here is what you see, first heading. So when we apply the color blue, the text that is displayed turns into blue. And if we say font size equal 12 pixels, this is the size. If we add like 50 pixels, the size becomes bigger. We shall be looking at some of these in when we start live examples. Okay, so HTML tag CSS Style Properties. Yeah, so there are very many HTML tags, and we have looked at some of them. And if you have been doing some extra studying on W3 schools, I know you have looked at more and more HTML tags. So most of those tags that we have looked at, they have different CSS properties or different characteristics for styling. So for example, color, like you can apply color to almost every HTML element. For example, if we have a paragraph and we want it to go green, yeah, so we look at the color property of that element. So if we just say color is equal to green, and we also have the background color. So we have the text color, which changes the color of actually what you see. Yeah. As I'm going to explain how these different properties can be applied to an element in details, I'm going to explain what you see on your right here is that the box model. I'm going to explain the box model in details so that you understand actually where does which property go. Okay, so when we look at the text color and the background color. So the background color is what do you want to be in the background of that element? For example, if it's a paragraph, behind the paragraph, what color do you want there? We shall be looking at all that. And then the dimensions, that's length and width. How long, how tall do you want that element to be? And the height, yeah? So we shall be looking at all that in details. And then the font, so which font family, for example, Arial, Sans Serif, or any other font, any other font that you want to apply to that element. And then the font size, yeah, we shall be looking at all that. Okay, then we have the background. We already looked at the background color, but you can also set different backgrounds. For example, if I want a background image, like I want to write a paragraph, but on top of an image, so I can actually set an image to be behind that paragraph. Then we have shadows. If you want an element to have shadows, corners, do you want pointed corners or do you want curved corners? Then the border, around the element, what do you want to have around the element? Yeah. So then we have margins. Margin is like the space between different HTML elements. Then we have the padding. Padding is the space inside an element before any text is being written inside that element. And then the position, where is your element going to be? Is it going to be directly below an element as it appears in the code, or do you want it to be relative to a certain element somewhere in your code? And then the display, for example, do you want the element to automatically go on a new line, or do you want the element to be in the same line as other elements? Yeah. So there are very many properties that we are going to be looking at. So these are just a few examples. Okay, so so CSS has something they call the box model. It uses the box model. What you see on your right here is an example of the box model. CSS uses the box model to explain exactly how you can apply most of these properties to a CSS element. Yeah. So look at all this as one element. The whole of this box on the right is one element. Yeah. So inside here, where you see the blue color, yeah, that's like the element itself. For example, if I have a heading that says this is the heading, yeah. So the text goes inside here, where you see the 33.391 times 20. They represent the width and the height. So it's width first and then height. So this means that this heading is going to have a width of 33.391 pixels and a height of 20 pixels. Yeah. So if what is in blue is our element, then what follows in green is our padding. Yeah. So the padding is inside the element. Okay, let me just first talk about everything here. So there is padding, there is border, there is margin, and then there is the position. Yeah. So these dotted lines that you see here actually explain every property attached to that element, that paragraph element. Yeah. So the margin is the space between that element and the element it follows, and the element that follows it from down here, and then the element on its left, and then the element on its right. And with CSS, you're actually able to set all these values. For example, we could have a margin of 5 pixels on top, so that if we have like a heading following another heading, we could have a margin or a space between the two headings of 5 pixels. And down here, we could put 10 pixels, so that whatever element follows it has a space between this element and that element of 10 pixels. And the same thing can happen on the left and on the right. So we can set the 4 margins. They could be the same or they can be different. So then after the margin, we have a border. Yeah. So a border is like what you see here in black, actually. So you can have a border of dotted lines. You could have a border of just a block line like this one. So a border is something that is usually used to show that this element actually stops here. It's just like the word border means. Yeah, so we are going to look at all these in details. So for the border, just like you see these corners are pointed, there's a property for border radius. Yeah, so you could just use that border radius to make these corners curved and things like that. Yeah, so and after the border is the padding. The padding is like you have a margin, you have a border, then inside now, before you print your text, yeah, what's the space that you want to leave inside the element itself, which is called the padding. As you can see, this element had 15, 15, 15, 15 on the left, right, and top and bottom. It had the same padding. Yeah. So basically, that's an element. So an element has the text inside, and then it has a padding, and it has a border, and it has a margin. Then it has the position or where it falls in the HTML, and it could have other properties like the background, the display position, the font. Yeah, but basically, what's more important here is the box model. When you understand the width and height of an element, the padding, and then the border, if an element has a border, and then the margin between that element and then the other different elements that might appear on the same page. So after we know these cool things of how we can style an HTML element to look awesome and then achieve whichever visuals that we want, how do we now do that with our HTML? We have already written HTML, and our HTML has all the content that we want, but our HTML is lacking the visual styles that we want, yeah, appealing look that we want. So after knowing how we can actually select and then create all these amazing styles, how do we link them to our HTML? So there are 3 ways of adding CSS styles to your HTML tag or page or website. So one of them is external style of linking. So a link to the CSS file is included inside a head tag. So when you look on your right here, we have our sample HTML document, yeah? So what you do is you write your CSS, in a separate file. For example, a file called style.css. We could write something like p color is equal to red in that file, and then we save the file. Yeah. So one of the way we can add or pull our CSS into our HTML element is using the link tag. Yeah. So link tags are used to include external files into our HTML. So for this case, we are linking a style sheet or a CSS file. So what you do is you write link, then relation is like, what are you linking? We are linking a style sheet, and then the type. What's the type? It's text/CSS, because it's a CSS file, and you're telling your browser or whichever parser for HTML that you're using that the file that I'm including is a CSS file. So that's what it means. Type is equal to text.css. So read it as a CSS file because it's a CSS file. And then the href, that's the reference, like the name of the file or the file path. So our file is called style.css. So when someone loads the HTML page that has something like that, that HTML page will automatically pull our styles from that file. Yeah, and that's actually the recommended way of including CSS. The second one is internal CSS. The example is what follows. And just one thing to note, for internal and external CSS, everything has to happen in between the head tag. Yeah, the opening and closing head tag. That's where everything has to happen. So what you do with internal CSS is you write the style tag inside the head tag, open the style tag and then close it. And then inside the style tag, you just write your CSS styles there. The selector, for example, here we have P, which is a paragraph. And for all paragraphs, we are applying the color red. That means you're making all our paragraphs to appear red. Yeah. And the third one is inline CSS. You write. I think we have tried to do this in some of our previous examples. So you go to the tag that you want to change or style, and then you write the style attribute, and then inside that style attribute is where you apply the value of all your CSS styles. Yeah, yeah. But the recommended way here is using the link, because it keeps your code clean and everything. We're going to look at other benefits. Yeah, and for CSS, if you want to write a comment, like to explain something, this is how you write it. /*, then you write your comment, then * to close the comment. Yeah, there's a simple note to note down here that inline styles override internal styles that override external styles in that order if there are conflicts on the same page. Yeah. So for example, if you have any of these, or actually if you have any of these two or all the three in your HTML document, for example, you're including an external CSS file, then you have a style tag inside here, and you also have inline styles. So if the styles happen to be targeting the same tag, that means they are conflicting. For example, in our style.css file, we wrote this same CSS that P then color is equal to like green. Yeah. And then here in our internal CSS, we write P is equal to P color is equal to red, and then here we say P color is equal to blue. Yeah. So the green color that was in the external CSS will be overwritten by this inline CSS. Internal CSS. Yeah. If we had green here, now it will be red when it reaches here, when it's being read. Yeah, when the browser is reading it. And if we happen to have like style color for this paragraph is equal to blue, this one will overwrite again what is here. So make sure you don't have conflicts, or else you'll be confused. So this one is always superior, inline, followed by this, and then lastly by style.css. Okay, CSS selectors. So we looked at only one selector actually, about how you can target your tags or elements, your HTML elements in your web page, how you can target them so that you can apply the different styles. So I'm just going to take you through how you can actually do that in very many different ways. One of the ways we looked at was using the tag itself, the tag name. For example, we have a paragraph. So what we do, we use P. We use the P tag. So we target the P tag by writing P. When you look on your right, there is the code. We have a div of class top selection right here. And inside that div, we have a paragraph with an ID, my paragraph, and a class red text, and another paragraph with a class red text, and the paragraph has a title called other. So if we want to target all paragraphs, regardless of any attributes inside them, like we want every paragraph on this page to have these properties. So that's what we do with the tag. If you can look on your left here, that's what we do with the tag selector. So you just write the tag itself, the tag name, for example, P. If you want to target all divs, you just write div, and then you open curly braces, and then inside the curly braces, you write all your styles that you want. For example, color, padding, margin. That will be applied to all paragraph tags on that page, yeah? And the second one is ID. If you want to target a specific tag or HTML element, what you do is you go to that tag. If you can look on your right here, there is the paragraph, the first paragraph tag. We gave it an ID of my paragraph. So that's what you do. You go to that element, and then you add an ID, right? ID, and then inside you write the name of the ID. You just choose any that makes sense to you according to the styles that you're going to apply. And the ID shouldn't have spaces. Yeah, it should be one word. So what you do is you write the ID, and then you coming back to the left here, you write that the hash. Hash means it's going to be an ID. That's how we select elements, by ID. You write hash, and then the name of the ID that you gave to the element, and then you open curly braces, and then inside the curly braces, that's why we shall write our CSS styles. So once that is done, it will apply those styles to that exact paragraph, and not all paragraph, but ID, because you're targeting that paragraph by ID. Then there is a class. So class is used to target different elements that might have a class. So an ID can only be applied to one element per page because it's an identifier. It's supposed to be unique, like a unique identifier, yeah? So you shouldn't have the same ID on different elements on one page. But for classes, you can actually the use of classes is to apply the same style to different elements. For example, if I have two paragraphs, if I have very many paragraphs on my page, and I have two paragraphs that I want to make red, so what I do is I just add a class attribute to those paragraphs that I want to make red. For example, in our example here, we have a class called red text. So basically, that's also your own naming. That the red text, you just come up with the word that makes sense, and it should also not have spaces between the words. It should be like one word, and it shouldn't begin with a number. Yeah. So that's what you do. You apply the class to every component that you want to style like that. And then in CSS, when we come back to the left side here, under class, you see dot red text. So the dot means it's a class. It means you are selecting a class. Yeah. So whatever you put inside the curly braces will apply to every element that has the red text class. Then there are other selectors like that combine the different selectors. For example, if I want to select all the P tags with red text as the class, I just say P dot red text. Yeah, it means a paragraph that has a class of red text. Another one is when you look at our example here, there is a div that has the top section class. The div with the class top section. So we just say dot top section, which selects the div and then space P. That means every paragraph that is under or inside that div. Yeah. Then another example is we can select the div that like dot top section, then space, then hash my paragraph, which means we are selecting a class of dot section, which is this div because it's the one with the class, and then space means inside. So hash my paragraph, hash means a class. So we look for any element that has a class of my paragraph. If you find a div with a class of top section and then a paragraph of my paragraph, it will match that selector. And then there are quite very many selectors. The W3 schools documentation and it explains them quite well. Yeah, but more is the div, then the greater than sign, then P. That one actually means look at divs and then a paragraph that is directly under that div. So for example, like in this example, we select the div and then these two paragraphs will appear. Yeah. But if there was actually a paragraph inside one of these paragraphs, it wouldn't be selected because it's not directly under that div. So there are very many selectors that we shall encounter as we design these web pages. Yeah, and then the next selector is the state stroke action. So for example, there is the P full colon hover. So hover is like you putting the cursor of your mouse over a certain element. So for example, if I move my cursor to over this paragraph, like in the browser when I'm viewing, like I'm hovering over it. Yeah. So you could actually select what happens if you move your mouse over that element. For example, I can choose that if I hover over this paragraph, I want it to change its color. If it was red, I want it to change to blue. Yeah. If it was the font size was small, I want it to be big. So you can actually select that action. So there are very, very many different actions that we are going to look at, but hover is just an example. And then there is attribute value. So you can actually select an element basing on its attribute or basing on its attribute and value. Yeah. So for example, if we in this example we have a paragraph. In this example, we have a paragraph that has a title. When you look on your right, the second paragraph has a title with the value other. Yeah. So we can actually select that paragraph based on its attribute and value. The attribute is title and the value is other. So that's how you just do it. You write P, you open square brackets, and then inside you write the attribute and the value. So that one will actually target every paragraph that has that attribute and value. Yeah, so there are very many selectors as we shall look at them as we move forward. Okay, so what are the CSS good practices? One of them is always use external CSS to have everything in one place. Yeah, I know we looked at internal and inline, and they are good hacks, but always use external CSS. It's advised to always use external CSS. Write CSS referencing your HTML elements from top to bottom. You don't want to be writing CSS of an element that is in the middle and then you put it first and then everything just confuses you when you come back to it. Then avoid using ambiguous selectors. Selectors that might select things that you don't want unknowingly. So always use selectors that you know will actually not affect other sections. Then indent to make your code readable. Combine CSS blocks that have similar attribute value pairs. For example, if we have an H1, H2, H3, all that have the color like gray, you want to make all your headings gray. So you don't write H1, then you open braces and put gray, and then you go down, and then you do that. So what you do is you have to write them in one line. So for example, you say H1, comma, H2, comma, H3, comma, then you open the braces. So whatever you put inside there will apply to all those selectors that you have separated with commas. So it's advised to do that because that brings about, it saves you space, readability, and whenever you want to update, you can just come and update in one place. So use appropriate naming convention. Don't give funny names for your classes, for your IDs, because they'll confuse you and they will confuse others the more. Yeah. So for example, if you like you create a class of gray text, like your class actually has properties of like gray text, call it gray text. Yeah. Don't call it my fancy style or my style. You give it a name that actually describes what. If it's a card, call it a card. Yeah. If it's a button, call it a button. Yeah. If like your styles are to make something look like a button, call it blue button, red button, big button, small button, something like that. Not my button. Yeah. So something that really makes sense. So use shorthand CSS wherever you can. So in CSS, CSS actually is sort of versatile in a way that it provides it gives you options to actually write shorthand for different properties. So for example, if we look at this border property, like you want to create a border for an element, yeah. So the longhand is you do it like how you see it down here, like border width 1 pixel, border color red, border style solid. Yeah, but CSS also supports shorthand. For example, if you could just say 1 pixel red solid. So CSS is very smart to understand that if you say 1 pixel, you mean border width. If you say red, you mean the border color. And then if you say solid, you mean the border style. Yeah. So you can actually do that. The same applies to like things like margin. Like you could just apply a margin on the 4 corners, left, right, top, and bottom by just saying margin 5 pixel. That will apply on both. Or margin 5 pixel, 10 pixel, which will apply on the y-axis and then the second value on the x-axis. Instead of writing margin top 5 pixel, margin left 2 pixel, margin right 2 pixels. So you can actually write shorthand, as we are going to encounter that as we go forward. Lastly is you minify CSS files in production to reduce the file size. So minifying is you actually use a script to minify that. For example, you remove spaces that might be consuming a lot of your storage. Yeah. So a file that is like 1 MB, if you minify it, it can come to close to like 300 KBs, hence reducing the size of the file. and increasing your page load speed. Okay, great. That makes it for the introduction to CSS. So thank you everyone for attending. I hope we learned something. We are going to apply what we have learned. So we shall be completing our other HTML example. We shall actually be getting exactly what we were building. Yeah, we shall apply CSS and everything that we have learned today to achieve exactly what we have been building, because all we need to get a good design is HTML and CSS, and we have covered that. Yeah. So for more reading, you can still go to W3 Schools and look at CSS, and we improve on our knowledge.